Hello and welcome to the Harmonious Harmonia podcast. Hopefully you recognise the voice. It's Keith Williams, President of Harmonia and co-founder. And on the line with me is, as usual, Alethea. And we have a pretty broad topic to discuss today, because I'm awful at coming up with a focused topic. So all the blame is on me. We're going to discuss the concept of adaptation and the Jedi path. And this all started from a very funny conversation I had with one of my martial arts students, and he asked me how I thought I would fare in a fair fight against a Gracie, and I had to turn around and I had to say, well, depends on the Gracie, as you have to do. To be honest, I think most would beat me quite handily. I've not been a professional for many years, and I don't do jiu-jitsu. But that then got me thinking about adaptation, because, of course, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu was very successful in the first UFC and the early events because Gracie Jiu-Jitsu was adapted to Veil Tudo. No one else was doing that. So when they started it, made it a global phenomenon. They were the ones who knew what they were doing. And how does this apply to the Jedi path? Well, in the Jedi path, and I'll ask Alethea to discuss this a bit more because she's a bit more knowledgeable of this. There's sort of different titles, aren't there, that we use in the path?
Well, the fiction uses several. I think it's Guardian, Sentinel, Consular, and actually those are the only three I can think of.
Yes.
But when we were looking at it, we kind of decided to do away with those strict definitions because, for example, Sentinel in the actual definition is somebody who protects something, like a building. Like something physical, not or a person from like a prisoner. And in the fiction, they kind of made this out to be more like what a soldier is. And those are completely different words.
A bit like the Green Beret of the Jedi, almost unconventional actions.
Effectively. So you sit there and we looked at it and we're kind of like, your definitions aren't really that great. They don't work. So we came up with three that we would use. So there's Jedi Mystic, which is what me and Gabriel Calderon came up with for our ministry, our clergy. That would be a good word for it. Our clergy class. So they focus more on the meditation, using spiritual arts to affect things around them, and would be kind of counselors in a way, not consular, but counselors.
So I was about to say, the way I sort of understand the mystic role in the Jedi community is they're sort of the guardians and keepers of our spiritual traditions.
Right.
What ties all together in our rituals and so on and so forth.
Right. And when I say counselor, I don't mean in the mental health profession. I just mean from the spiritual profession. Like we have in Christianity, there are pastoral counselors.
Well, yes.
So they're not necessarily trained in the mental health section. So that would be what they fall into. And then we have healers who are trained professionals in the health services, whether it's alternative healing. And I know that you're over there screaming.
No, I'm not screaming. I've not muted the mic.
That's fair. But alternative healing, people who actually go into scientific, such as surgical or just becoming a doctor in general. And then those who fall in the mental health services. And so, like, even an herbalist would kind of fall into the alternative. So we have the healer class, and then the final one is the guardian class. And this is more in line with our soldier idea. But not just soldiers. You can be a police officer. You can be a guard at a prison. You are guarding people, guarding something. And another one that could even be put in there is if you happen to be for like a wolf refuge.
Right.
So you would be guarding wolves at this
place. So essentially
place.
the clue is in the name.
Yes.
So that's how you refined for the classes we use in reality. The clue should be in the name. Healers are involved in healing, guardians involved in guarding, mystics are involved in mysticism.
Right. And then there's a fourth area. Some people don't like to specify into anything in particular. And these people would probably be more in, like, someone who does search and rescue, for example.
Okay.
They would fall more into the line of a non-specific Jedi Master. And this is just because that's something that they do. They want to help people in the long run. If you were a activist in some sort of a political thing, as long as you're not just going out there and picketing and that's all you do, but let's say that you write books. So if who was the person that wrote Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry? That's actually a pretty good one.
Yes.
Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. Well, while I'm looking for her, it was Mildred Taylor.
Okay.
And this, now I don't know if anybody actually knows what this book is. This was a book I had to read when I was in middle school. But it's a fantastic book about the struggles of Black people. Now, it follows a specific person, and you see from their perspective what's going on, but it's talking about all the problems that were going on during that time frame. And if this person had taken on the Jedi path as theirs, I'm not saying that Mildred was a Jedi, but if Mildred had taken on the Jedi path, then she would become, because of her works, a non-specific Jedi Master, because she didn't fall into the other three. That doesn't make her any less important, though.
That makes sense.
Means that there isn't a class that's specific to her.
No. You said all of these classes are quite flexible. There's no sort of what we would say a complete idea of each. So there is no idealized guardian that is the perfect guardian, because a guardian can take many different molds. Right.
Now that said, I would almost say that there is probably a perfect one.
I think there's probably someone you could probably find in each you'd probably find people or individuals you would use as the benchmark or your sort of compass point for how you define these different roles. Because of course, in realistic practice, you have to find your realistic examples.
Right. But, in my opinion, I actually know somebody in the community right now who would be the perfect Jedi Guardian. And, kind of helps that he does a lot of missions outside of the U.S. to try to coordinate peace and whatnot. But I'm not going to say specifically who they are. Someone out there, I'm sure, does know who I'm talking about, though.
But I'm fairly certain people will figure it out quite easily. Going back to this concept of adaptation. So, with our courses, we often discuss something in the Jedi Compass. And again, we'll put a link to the Jedi Compass in the description, so people know what it is, in case this is news to anyone. Of the prowesses. And the prowesses are... I'll let you take the lead on the prowesses. You helped write them.
So there are 4 prowesses, and while that may be true that people think that I helped write them, the idea actually came from Andy Spalding on this one. Right. So there is the physical art, the spiritual art, the scholarly art, and the defense art. And all of these are different roles or different things that people can do. Sometimes they will cross into each other. So, for example, an easy one to put in there is your defense art may also be your physical art. And a lot of Jedi actually align with that idea because they see it in the films. Oh, well, Jedi got into physical altercations to protect other people. They didn't attack. They defended. Well, okay.
Unless you're a droid.
In the films, that might be.
If you're a droid,
arguable.
You've got no chance.
That's true. But
sorry, droids. You can simulate self-awareness and sentience all you like. You don't count to Jedi.
I will say, okay, I'll probably go more like this. The Jedi path idealized the idea of not attacking first and
Hmm.
instead defending. But as we can see in many of the films, they encounter Darth Maul, and next thing you know, there's a clash, and it's pretty much the Jedi that started it, even though he was kind of sitting there as a posture of, I'm going to fight you. But he didn't make the first move, you know?
Well, if you go back to, and this is getting a hint off track, but again, it's the weird filmography of Mr. Lucas, his philosophy of filmography. And if you watch any old Kurosawa films, Japanese martial arts films, they get into this idea of that the samurai or martial artist can sense the intent of an opponent. And you see it in sumo still when Rikishi, how they start a bout. It's supposed to be about, you're supposed to be able to read your opponent's intent. And that's how the bout starts. You read, this is when we start.
Okay, fair.
So in that sense, maybe, and again, back to the strange filmography of Lucas, to that extent, it didn't matter that nothing was said, is they could sense this is the only way this goes.
Okay, fair. That's fair.
Again, yes, getting back to the weird filmography and film philosophy of Lucas, it's that unless you understand his influences, sometimes a lot of what he does is lost on you, especially when it comes to choreography. Especially episode 2, where it looks like Obi-Wan somehow got worse at lightsaber fighting.
Okay.
So but that's a topic for another time.
Yeah, that's a topic for another time. That sounds like a very interesting topic. You happen to know a lot about the filmography there. Be a good in-depth analysis. Yeah. But here's the thing. So, like I was saying, your physical art and your defense art could cross into each other. They could be the same thing. If you are a soldier, your defense art is like using guns. It is.
It's the martial arts or
right.
Combatives.
And it's also your physical art, because you can't really wield that weapon very well if you can't carry it. And by that, I'm talking about like the big guns. We're talking Mark 19s that some of these people have to carry all on their own, even though technically, according to the training manual, you're supposed to have a 2-person carry. But we all know that's not how it really works. Well, I don't know if you know that, but I know that.
Well, I was just going to say, in every situation, in anything you do, the manual is only correct up until things actually happen.
Pretty much.
I mean, in St. John, for example, we're always supposed to work in a pair. You're never supposed to be at a post by yourself. But, yeah. I'm not able to claim that it never happens, that you won't occasionally find yourself by yourself.
That's fair. So, and these are all things. So yeah, your scholarly art could be your spiritual art. You may sit there and learn how to. Okay, for example, myself, and Gabe are building the Mystic program.
Yes.
We're hoping. Now we've gotten to the point where most of what we want is written, but we found that we need to add stuff here or there, and that we need to also kind of branch out into religious specific for ourselves, because that's what we've determined is the only way that you can become a Master Jedi Mystic. And we have to, like, I'm writing classes on how you can find different things from the Jedi path in the Bible, and I'm going to have that on Harmonia. I'm not sure what he's going to do exactly with his, but he's going to work on a shamanic tradition, so that we can also add that to Harmonia. We have some of those themes kind of woven into our own programs already by having people think more deeply on that, but that would be our scholarly art translated also into our spiritual art, because our scholarship works to create our spiritual.
I was going to say it's
but that doesn't mean that we let the other things slip. So just because I have a spiritual and a scholarly art does not mean that I get to skip out on the defense art or the
Yeah.
physical art.
Yeah. But what I was going to say is, as psychologists, we describe ourselves as practitioner scientists, and basically we are supposed to stay up to date with the research. We do engage in research. We are scientists at the end of the day, but we're practicing scientists in that we derive from the literature, the academic aspect of the research, but then we take it into the field and we practice it. So in that sense, that makes perfect sense.
Or test it.
Practice, sometimes we test it. As I said, I'm still involved in research to an extent.
Fair.
You never really walk away from research in psychology or any applied discipline, really. So that's a warning to anyone who's currently doing a degree or something and they think, thank God I'll be able to get away from research when I finally get into a profession. No. In an applied discipline, you never get away from research. A good practitioner never gets away from the research.
Well, now here's an interesting thing.
Do
you think that you could apply all four arts, all four prowesses, to being a psychologist?
That is an interesting question. So what I would say is my physical art is my martial arts, karate and so forth. I would say my defense art is my first aid, because that's what I go out and do. My scholarly art is my psychology, and I would say my spiritual art is probably my interest in the esoteric. And because of my practice of mindfulness and so forth, I am actually quite up to date on most meditation techniques and so forth. So I can guide most people through meditation quite easily and so forth. And I do have something of Freudian background, so I do know how to sort of the models for dream interpretation and so forth. So I can apply all to psychology. I mean, I've had to use my martial arts skills to defend myself from patients who've turned violent. I've had to use first aid on a patient because they've done something to injure themselves in the course of my spiritual art. As I said, to an extent, it's helped with my application of mindfulness. So yes, it's all of these arts somehow get used occasionally, day to day, in my psychological practice. I mean, I've helped use my martial arts to teach other practitioners ways to, so passive restraints and so forth. How if someone does turn violent against you, how to defend yourself without injuring them, because that's a huge problem for us.
Yes.
Because we can't go about injuring people, and the reality is that when our patients also turn violent, the main danger is them to themselves, because if they get away from us and attack someone else, and they don't, the police aren't going to know what's going on there.
Right.
So that's so yeah. I mean, all of my prowesses, as it were, I could very easily use in a day-to-day life. I mean, I still, for example, my martial arts, I teach self-defense quite regularly as well to cadets and so forth. So yeah, all of my skills I do use they're very interchanged.
Now, you want to see how mine works?
Yeah.
Okay, so my scholarly art is, actually I have many scholarly arts, but I'm just going to tie it to the mystic. My scholarly art would be in psychological first aid.
All right.
As well as my Christian training. What I'm doing with the research and whatnot, and learning how to translate it into terms that Jedi would understand and they would want to integrate into their life. My spiritual art is, well, mostly ceremony, magic. Now, I know that sounds really weird to people, because they're like, oh, wait, you're Christian. Well, yeah, but ceremony magic in this sense is not one where you sit there and you call on the gods and whatnot. I'm talking about being able to use ritual in a way that it calls to someone's spirit for them to understand and meditate. It's a different form of using it for a meditation tool.
And of course, the Mass. It's a ritual.
Right.
If one is Catholic.
Yes, exactly.
Or Anglican.
So that would be considered sort of ceremonial magic. It's not an evil term. I'm not talking about it in the terms of, pagan worship and whatnot. I'm just talking about it in general. So those are my two. My third one would be my physical art. And physical art ties into my spiritual art because when you're doing something, then you have to make sure that your body is aligned with your spirit and your soul. And you can't really know or understand how that is without testing the boundaries of your body. And making sure that you know how to tell the different muscles and whatnot. And it's actually believed in many traditions that you will not be able to realistically tap into your own spiritual self unless you have good health altogether. This also allows us the ability to be able to run in to a situation. So even outside of all this, it ties in with just me being able to run in and help somebody whenever something arises.
Yeah.
Then we've got spiritual, physical, scholarly, and finally defense. Now, defense art is an interesting one because there are people out there who, whether you believe it or not, believe in being demonically possessed. Now, when I say whether you believe it or not, I'm not just talking about Keith here. I'm talking about anybody listening in. There are things that people believe are a demonic possession. And therefore, the spiritual art also translates into this by learning how to overcome those things from the perspective of whatever religion that you're part of. So for me, it would be from the Christian perspective. And being able to align myself in the spiritual sense, I would be able to defend somebody against mystical attacks as long as they are open to the Christian side of things.
Makes sense. As I said, if we're talking about prowess, if it's well adapted, going back to what I was talking about before, adaptation, and if it's well adapted, it will all find a focus somewhere. You'll find how they interchange, how they feed each other. But they aren't separate pools, but they're interconnected pools, as it were. So it makes sense that your defense art would be tied entirely or quite distinctly to your spiritual and your scholarly art.
Right. And now that's not to say that these are the only ways I limit myself. My physical art also translates into my defense art, not just in the sense of the spiritual side of things. I mean, in the physical side of things.
Yep.
So my defense or my physical art makes me capable of rushing to a scene where someone is stuck in a traffic accident, maybe in the middle of the interstate. I'm able to rush in, get to those people that are in that traffic accident, assess their situation, and all of this, if I don't have the ability to keep my breathing right, can throw everything off.
Oh yes, always breathe. So take a deep breath first and then dip in.
So you use your physical art to be able to master your body so that you will react properly in whatever training capacity you have. Otherwise, your body just kind of freaks out and you're not able to fulfill the whole role.
Well, to be honest, if you're well supported and you have the right training, your training does kick in.
But there are limitations to what your training can do if you are not physically capable.
Oh yes, very much. Very much so. I mean, for example, going back to St. John again and first aid, we're expected to be able to do 4 minutes of CPR. But that's always with the assumption that an ambulance can arrive within 8 minutes and that you have someone working with you.
Right.
But I'll be frank, is not an entirely realistic situation depending where you are in the world. I live in...
I imagine.
I live just over the border from Wales in the largest rural county in England called Shropshire. And we have about 15 ambulances ready at any time for hundreds of miles.
Oh, wow.
Well,
yeah, sounds about right.
Just, let me see. Shropshire Square Mile it's the largest rural county in England. So 15 ambulances. Technically, we should have 25, but in terms of actual crewed and ready at any single time, 15 stretch.
Fair enough. Wow.
Yeah. So that's my point, is that you do have to consider your training. Never work to the bare adequate. Always in your training, as you said, your physical aspect, you have to train yourself fully.
And you can, and going back to kind of what you wanted to talk about before, the whole adaptation process. As you can see, you and I, we have adapted some of our training in these areas to specifically what we do.
Yes. Yep. Yes. So we've discussed well-adapted examples, but before we wrap up, maybe we should discuss some maladapted. So sometimes how people misread the prowesses. So, for example, someone might read scholarly art, spiritual art, physical art, and defense art, and automatically their mind might go to the wrong place for each of them. So
I meditate the Eastern method, but I don't get anything out of it. I just clear my mind. And then I do a scholarship thing or scholarly art. Like, I don't know, you learn a lot about history, but you don't apply that history to anything.
Yes.
Then you learn a defense art, like physical fitness or martial art, which also fits your physical fitness art. And the only thing you're really getting out of it in the long run, because you don't need it for anything, is just basically how to be a well-meaning or a person that could defend themselves if they ever have to deal with it.
I mean, in the Western world, and this is going to be a pretty stark statistic. In the Western world, most people actually have one fight in their life, and they will have had that physical altercation in high school or younger. They won't have that in adult life. And also people who engage in martial arts are usually even to this day, is still people from more affluent backgrounds or who have the opportunity, but don't actually live in places where physical violence is a problem. So people who learn self-defense actually don't get into altercations because they're training it to avoid violence. It's not, they just don't live in violent areas.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the thing. People are like, well, if you want to fight, you have to go looking for it, and that's the reality of it. If you've got money, time to practice a martial art, then to be honest, yeah, if you want to fight, you have to go look for it because you're not a vulnerable citizen. So those would be good examples of maladaptation. People have read defense art and thought, oh, well, okay, Jedi were warriors at the end of the day, so defense art obviously means something martial. Spiritual art, well, the Jedi were sort of Zen Buddhist
meditation.
Yeah, shamans, so should practice something like that. Scholarly art, well, when I read scholarly, I think of an academic pursuit. What's an academic pursuit I enjoy? To use your example again, history. But if you're not applying that, how is that a useful scholarly art? And again, physical art, they might think, well, I go to the gym every other day. That'll do.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the major problems that we've had in the Jedi community as a whole since I even got in, was that people believe that by just learning these skills, that makes them Jedi. And it's like, no, the Jedi path is not just something you learn and that makes you it. It's not something that you just kind of like, oh, I agree with these things. It's a living philosophy. It is an
One
active
swallow does
philosophy.
not a spring make.
So. It's action. You have to take action on this thing called the hero's journey, which was the inspiration for the film's overall storyline in the whole thing.
And Lucas's daddy issues. Let's not forget those. But I mean, it was Earth Day yesterday. Good old Earth Day. Happy birthday, Earth. I don't think it's that exact. But talking about this and going back to my blog when I was discussing as Jedi, our belief is we live in a connected world. We accept that we have an effect on our environment and our environment has an effect on us. And so when we notice we have a maladaptive or destructive behavior, we work to get rid of it. And when we recognize there's things around us which make us indulge in these destructive behaviors and so forth, we get rid of them. And as I said, that shouldn't be revelatory thinking for any Jedi.
Right.
Being a little flippant.
It's written right there in the overcome section, overcome
Yes,
attachments.
exactly. So, but coming back to prowesses, again, if your prowesses are maladapted, you've just done the bare minimum to say, well, I've got these, so they fit the bare bone minimum, but actually are they adapted to you being effective in a role? And this comes back to talking about the roles. Someone might think they are actually, oh, I fit the role of Guardian quite well, but no, they've just looked at the most superficial level because, say, they're a martial artist who runs their own dojo. But actually, you don't actively go out and protect your community.
Well, now hold on.
Yeah.
Well, okay, that
but this is
probably be considered a form, maybe not Guardian. It might not. It does not seem to fit that in particular, but it does fit a non-specific master.
Yes,
because what you're doing is you're actively teaching the next generation to center themselves. Now, that said, if all you're doing is teaching the martial arts themselves and you don't give them the philosophy behind it and how it should work, if you're not conveying that to them, then you're pretty much not really fulfilling the role of being a Jedi.
Depends on the culture as well.
Well, what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, it depends on it. I mean, some martial arts don't have that sort of. I mean, judo, for example, you have that culture of mutual benefit. You are helping each other advance your judo skills. Yes, you compete and so forth, but competition is a vehicle for improving each other, not just yourself. Whereas, and I would
say that it doesn't matter what the culture of that particular
as long as you're passing on a philosophy, right? You aren't just this is how you hurt someone.
Correct. You have to teach them to have restraint with their own power.
Yeah. But that's what I mean. That's why it's important to look and adapt and say, is this actually what I'm aiming at? Is this title that I'm looking at actually guiding me at all, or is it taking me away from what I can be doing effectively? So, and I think that's something we struggle. I mean, we're nearing the end of our time slot, really. And what I was going to say a few years ago, I mean, this would be alien to anyone quite new to the community, but we've both been in over a decade now. And a number of years ago, when the whole Guardian, Sentinel, Consular thing first emerged, there was a lot of debate about whether they were useful titles, and there was a lot of people saying, no, there's just Jedi, there isn't such a thing, it's absurd. And I think in some ways both sides were true and remain true. You are a Jedi, or you are not a Jedi. But these different distinctions don't make anyone more of a Jedi or less of a Jedi.
No, I mean, they don't. They just give you an idea of what you do.
Yes, they just give you an idea. I mean, a Guardian, we think of Jedi as being, we protect other people. But again, I go back to the idiom "physician heal thyself." We do need members in our community who look at our own community and say, "Hang on, people, are we helping our fellow Jedi?" I think that's something we can sometimes lose, and that's why it's important we have these different roles. But we understand that no, there's no such thing as more or less of being a Jedi. If you're a Jedi and you follow the Guardian path, you're not more of a Jedi than, say, someone who follows the Healer's path, or the Mystic path, or the nondescript path, as the case may be. Yes. And that can always be the danger when you have these subdivisions, or what appear like subdivisions, is that one is greater than the other, and that's not what it's about. It's about adapting your Jedi path, adapting your life to living the philosophy the best as you can.
Absolutely.
So.
On that note, I guess we're actually done. Our time is up.
Our time is up. Right. Well, we are still looking for a tagline.
Yes, we are.
Otherwise, I will just continue to try and open with terrible jokes. And I don't think anyone wants that. I don't want that. I'll run out of material very quickly.
And then we'll just repeat.
Yes. I can't tell the jokes about the nuns because we couldn't put it on YouTube.
That's true. So, if you're interested in learning more about how these different spiritual arts work, what they are, or not spiritual arts, the prowesses, 3 of the classes that we have are supposed to be aimed at teaching you what they are. The physical art, however, is aimed at teaching you basic health. The reason why we did this was because we didn't really want to teach you physically how to do martial arts or anything like that. We'd prefer that you would actually have a trained person person teaching you that. Make sure that you're not going to hurt yourself.
And with that said, most of our courses do touch on the concept of the prowesses.
Yes.
Because they are the cornerstones of actual practice, and we try to be fairly practically minded.
We do.
We are about the applied philosophy.
But we'll hope that if you want to learn more, that you'll join our classes. All the money that we're getting this year goes to help fund the 2019 Jedi Gathering in the UK that will be run by Keith here. Unfortunately, I'm in America and I don't have enough money to get out there. I also don't have a Visa card. So there's that.
Well, that's something to work on.
Yes, eventually. But I got to get the finances right.
Yeah, if you don't want to help fund the gathering, help fund Olivia getting a Visa card, because that would help a lot. Help with that, please. And hopefully, course-wise, we should finally be launching the last of our courses in May.
Yes,
so
and that
we'll
be adding a teacher for that too.
Yes.
So we will see you all then, and we hope that the Force will be with you.